Good evening. I'm Nima and this is Forum Daily for Monday, September 19th. And tonight, the world bid a final goodbye to Queen Elizabeth II and her 70-year reign. The late Queen's state funeral drew presidents and kings, princes and prime ministers. Crowds massed along the streets of London on Monday to honor a monarch whose 70-year reign defined an age. Around 2,000 people, ranging from world leaders to healthcare workers, gathered to mourn her. This included the Prime Minister and Governor General. After the funeral, the coffin passed through central London and it was placed in a hearse to go to Windsor Castle. This is where the Queen will be interred alongside her husband, Prince Philip. Well, joining us now to unpack the funeral is Dr. Michael Jackson, president of the Institute for the Study of the Crown in Canada. Dr. Jackson, welcome back to Forum Daily.
It's good to be back. Thank you.
Now, for our viewers who were not able to watch the funeral, can you walk us through the main events that unfolded?
Well, it all started really at St. Giles Cathedral, Edinburgh, where the Queen's coffin lay in state. And then there was a service there. Then the coffin came to London, to Buckingham Palace, and from there to the Parliament buildings, to Westminster Hall, the most ancient part of the Parliament buildings, where it lay in state for several days. And that allowed tens of thousands of people to pass by and pay their respects. It was a huge crowd, amazing, the number of people that camped out for hours and hours, for almost for a day, to get by and to go and see and pay their respects to that coffin. And then today it went to Westminster Abbey near the Parliament buildings for the funeral service. And then after the funeral service, the coffin went to Windsor Castle, to the ancient St. George's Chapel, Windsor, where there was a committal service. That is the actual funeral, the part of the funeral service where the body is committed to the Lord. And then after that, there'll be a private interment where the coffin is placed next to that of the Queen's late husband, Prince Philip.
All right, Dr. Jackson, it really is amazing how many people the Queen has touched. And we saw those lines outside waiting overnight to see the Queen's coffin. So how is the United Kingdom reacting on this day? What is the overall sentiment among people in the UK tonight?
Well, the impression I get is one of great grief, great sorrow, great respect and love for the Queen. She's a remarkable woman. She's touched a century. In her 70-year reign, she's touched so many people with her constancy, her devotion to duty, her love and affection, and her support for our liberties and freedoms.
And what is the significance of this funeral to Canada and Canadians in particular, Dr. Jackson?
Well, Queen Elizabeth has been our Queen. The only Queen most of us have known. I happen to know because I'm old enough to have known King George VI, but she is the Queen that most of Canadians have known, and she's marked an era. She's been with us all the way. She's been with us at our major events in our nation's history, the Centennial of Confederation, for example, the opening of the St. Lawrence Seaway in 1959, the patriation of the Constitution in 1982, and her last visit in 2010 was the centennial of the Royal Canadian Navy. So Queen Elizabeth has been with us by our side for all the major events in our nation's history for 70 years.
All right, Dr. Jackson, just over a minute left here, but every moment leading up to and during today's funeral was meticulously planned and had a symbolic meaning, down to the items on the Queen's coffin. So what stood out to you the most in today's ceremony?
Well, I think it was the grandeur of the ceremony, the wealth, the richness of the church service and the music we heard, and the respect paid by the people. And I especially liked the National Memorial Service in Ottawa, which happened today, the remarks by former Governor General Adrian Clarkson and former Premier Brian Mulroney about their personal reflections on their meetings with the Queen and what she meant to them. That was quite an eloquent moment for both of them.
All right, Dr. Jackson, just about 30 seconds left here, but what is the legacy that Queen Elizabeth's life and reign leaves for Canada, in your opinion?
She's left Canada a stronger democracy. She adapted to the circumstances of the modern era, and Canada has come out all the better for her lengthy reign.
All right, Dr. Jackson, thank you again for joining us today on Forum Daily, and we look forward to having you again to talk about the new king.
I look forward to that.
Thank you, sir. Stay with us. Forum Daily will have more coverage on the Queen's funeral and her involvement with Canada later in the newscast. We're going to take a look at the ways Canada and Canadians are remembering the Queen and her legacy on the day of her state funeral. Along with that, we'll take a look at the major news stories and headlines from across Canada and around the world. So stay tuned. Forum Daily will return right after the break. Stay tuned. The funeral service for Queen Elizabeth has been a solemn event of remembrance and thanksgiving. The Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, said, quote, "Few leaders receive the outpouring of love that we have seen for the late monarch." The Queen's coffin made its way through the streets of London and was then brought to Windsor Castle for the burial service. All right, turning to the United Nations gathering in New York City this week. This is where Prime Minister Justin Trudeau will be among the world leaders to attend. It comes in the shadow of Russia's war with Ukraine. The conflict is expected to dominate talks at the annual General Assembly meeting. In addition to the war, many nations worldwide are also confronting inequality, the climate crisis, the threat of multiple famines, and the increasing misinformation and hate speech online. Meanwhile, activists are pressuring the Trudeau government to renew its support for fighting infectious diseases abroad. This follows an embarrassing Montreal conference that left the sector worried that Canada will fall short. On Wednesday, the PM will attend a pledging conference for the Global Fund to fight AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria in New York City. Canada is one of the fund's largest supporters and has pledged $4 billion since 2002. The number of newborns taken into care has dropped dramatically following the move to end birth alerts across Canada. But despite that, child welfare experts are warning that ceasing the practice cannot be the only step that governments take to keep families together. Birth alerts were used to notify hospitals and child welfare agencies that a more thorough assessment was needed before a newborn was discharged to a parent deemed as high risk. Dr. Cindy Blackstock of the First Nations Child and Family Caring Society says ending the practice doesn't deal with the issues of poverty, housing, and racism. Moving to new research by the Canadian Medical Association Journal that looks into the effectiveness of safer opioid supply programs. The study indicates they can significantly reduce emergency department visits and hospitalizations for people at risk of overdose. Tara Gomez, the Toronto-based lead author of the study, says the findings show that such programs can be beneficial and safe. The study, published today, looked at people who used a safer supply program in London, Ontario from 2016 to 2019. Researchers found ER visits and hospital admissions dropped after a year and saw no increased risk of infections or overdoses. Canada is banking on newcomers to keep the economy humming along. Meanwhile, banks themselves are eyeing the hundreds of thousands of people coming to the country every year as a key source of client growth. The federal government says newcomers account for almost all of Canada's labor force growth and roughly 3/4 of population growth. The segment has pushed banks to create partnerships like one recently announced between RBC and ICICI Bank in India. However, immigration continues to be a controversial topic on the Quebec election campaign trail. The head of a major employers group says an election campaign is not the time to have a serious discussion about immigration. Carl Blackburn is the president and CEO of the Conseil du Patronat de Québec. He says campaign slogans and political messages aren't suited for rational conversations about newcomers and their contributions to the economy. During Thursday night's leaders' debate, CAQ leader François Legault warned that if Quebec doesn't gain more powers over immigration, it could end up like Sweden, which is struggling with a crime wave linked to immigration. On the West Coast, an evacuation order for British Columbia's largest wildfire has been rescinded, even though the BC Wildfire Service says the blaze remains out of control. The Battleship Mountain wildfire in the Prince George Fire Center is now estimated at more than 30,200 hectares in size. The fire forced an evacuation order for close to 1,000 residents in the northeast corner of the province, but the District of Hudson's Hope says that has been lifted. One of the biggest road hockey tournaments in the Maritimes was back in action over the weekend. More than 600 participants competed in 60 teams for the Because You Care Cup. The foundation's manager says the event is one of the biggest fundraisers of the year for the Cape Breton Regional Hospital Foundation. A group of young Blackfoot actors will be embarking on a time-traveling journey in a play opening in Calgary this week. It will focus on the signing of the historic Treaty 7 agreement with the Canadian government. Okosi takes the audience through a 200-year journey, beginning on the day the deal was signed in 1877. Director Michelle Thrush says every scene of the show occurs on September 22nd. It just happens to play out each time in a different year. She adds it will also focus on the impact of the Indian Act. Stay with us. Forum Daily will be right back after the break with a look at the major news stories and headlines from around the world. So stay tuned. We'll be right back. Ukrainian authorities have denounced a Russian missile strike close to a nuclear power plant in southern Ukraine. They are calling the attack an act of nuclear terrorism. Ukrainian authorities say the missile attack came close to the main facility, but no damage was found on any of the 3 reactors. The nuclear plant is Ukraine's second largest after the Zaporizhzhia plant, which is Europe's largest nuclear power station and has repeatedly come under fire during the war. All right, well, meanwhile, a top Russian security official says Moscow and Beijing must show even greater readiness for mutual support now more than ever. Russian President Vladimir Putin met with Chinese President Xi Jinping last week in Uzbekistan. This was their first encounter since Mr. Putin sent troops to invade Ukraine in late February. A Chinese government statement issued today did not mention Ukraine, but it did say that Mr. Xi promises strong support for Russia's core interests. Earlier today, a Russian missile struck close to reactors at a nuclear power plant in Ukraine. The U.S. has brokered a deal that will see the release of an American contractor who was held hostage in Afghanistan for more than 2 years by the Taliban. Mark Frericks was abducted in January 2020, and he was believed to have been held since then by the Taliban-linked Haqqani network. Negotiations for his release had centered on a deal that would also involve the release of Bashir Nurzai. Now, he is a notorious drug lord and member of the Taliban who had spent 17 years and 6 months in U.S. captivity at Guantanamo Bay. Moving to Sweden now, where the leader of the country's third largest party, the center-right moderates, has formally been asked to try to form a new coalition government. It could include the populist Sweden Democrats. Sweden's 4 center-right parties won a narrow majority over the central-left, which is led by Prime Minister Magdalena Andersson on the September 11th election. It seems likely that the Sweden Democrats will have significant leverage over any center-right government. The party was founded in the 1980s by far-right extremists, and now it's the country's second largest in parliament. The populists campaigned on a platform of cracking down on crime and strictly limiting immigration. Israeli officials have denounced comments made by Iran's president as anti-Semitic Holocaust denial. During an interview with CBS's 60 Minutes, President Ebrahim Raisi said there are some signs that the Holocaust happened, but that the issue required more research. Mr. Raisi made the remarks ahead of his visit to New York City for the United Nations General Assembly. It will be his first appearance at the annual gathering of world leaders. All right, turning to the Caribbean now, where Hurricane Fiona is roaring over the Dominican Republic after knocking out power across all of Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico's governor is calling the damage catastrophic. This was after the hurricane tore roofs off homes, washed away a bridge, and ripped asphalt from roads. Many people have been left without water, and at least 1,300 people spent the night in shelters across the island. Forecasters say the storm is expected to emerge over the Atlantic in the afternoon, and it will pass close to the Turks and Caicos Islands tomorrow. All right, switching gears to the world's first public database on fossil fuel production reserves and emissions, which launches today. Called the Global Registry of Fossil Fuels, it was developed by the group's Carbon Tracker and the Global Energy Monitor, and it contains data on over 50,000 oil, gas, and coal fields in 89 countries, covering 75% of global production. It shows the United States and Russia have enough fossil fuel reserves to exhaust the world's remaining carbon budget to stay under 1.5 degrees Celsius warming. And it shows that if burnt, the world's reserves would generate 3.5 trillion tons of greenhouse gas emissions, which is more than all that's been produced since the Industrial Revolution. The United Arab Emirates will be launching its first lunar rover in November. Mission manager Hamad Al-Marzouki spoke on this to a state-linked newspaper. He said that the Rashid rover would be launched aboard a Falcon 9 SpaceX rocket from the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. An exact launch date will be announced next month. The rover is to be deposited on the moon by a Japanese iSpace lander sometime in March. Amanda Gorman wants to express the impact of unity when she recites her poem at the United Nations General Assembly. The 23-year-old has written an ode we owe. This in hopes of bringing all nations together to tackle various issues of disparity, along with preserving the planet. Ms. Gorman became an instant sensation last year when she recited her poem, The Hill We Climb, at U.S. President Joe Biden's swearing in. All right, after the break, we're going to take a look at how Canadians are marking the Queen's life on the day of her state funeral. So stay with us. Forum Daily will be right back shortly. Governor General Mary Simon has issued a release marking the state funeral for Queen Elizabeth II. She says the Queen was there through good times and bad to bear witness to the evolution of our history. The Governor General says we see that same commitment to service in His Majesty King Charles III. All right, well, meanwhile, commemorations are being held in honor of the Queen across the country. Lieutenant governors and premiers attended church services from the Maritimes to BC. Meantime, members of the military and RCMP paraded through the streets of Ottawa this afternoon. Former Prime Minister Brian Mulroney and former Governor General Adrian Clarkson paid tribute to the Queen's life and accomplishments at a national service in Ottawa. Many Canadians took in the early morning proceedings from their homes or local viewing parties. In Yellowknife, Mary York Condon arose at 4 a.m. local time to begin watching what she referred to as a monumental historical event, which reminded her of when she swore allegiance to the Queen as a civilian member of the RCMP. Ms. York Condon said she wanted to honor a Queen who had served Canada well. All right, well, the Queen was known to have a deep affection for Canada. We'll now take a look at her relationship with the country from the start of her reign until her death.
The rising generation, whether English or French-speaking, could show so clearly that you belong to one great Canadian family.
The year when all Canada looks back over 100 years of growth and solid achievement.
There could be no better moment for me as Queen of Canada to declare again my unbounded confidence in the future of this wonderful country. years, this rich expanse has been yours in its most precious sense, and it bears the name you chose, that speaks of your ancestors, Canada's original citizens. During my lifetime, I have been a witness to this country for more than half its history since Confederation. I have watched with enormous admiration how Canada has grown and matured while remaining true to its history, its distinctive character, and its values. This nation has dedicated itself to being a caring home for its own, a sanctuary for others, and an example to the world. God bless you all, and God bless Canada.
Queen Elizabeth II will be reunited with her late husband, Prince Philip, when she's laid to rest in Windsor. After the pomp and pageantry of the Queen's state funeral, she will be buried in an intimate ceremony with family at St. George's Chapel on the grounds of Windsor Castle. All right, I'm Nima Rajan, and this was Forum Daily for Monday, September 19th. Thank you again for joining us tonight, and take care, Canada. We'll see you again next time.